live on the internet.
Cool.
And our names are wrong in so many ways.
So many ways.
So many ways.
First of all, I'm Jake.
Yeah. Jake, you look different. I don't did you get a haircut? Maybe lost a pound? I don't know. There's something different.
I was supposed to get the banjo. Darn. Yep. I got nothing. I got just absolutely. I am Jake. Hello.
This is Dan Whitener, longtime friend of the podcast, guest on our second episode ever with his bandmate Randy Green for one of my favorite conversations that we've had with Gangsta Grass on everything. That was, it's funny to think back because that was way back in late April, May, like right in the middle of the beginning of everything. Well, I guess it was probably June. I can't remember exactly, but it was very early in our sort of rolling out of this podcast, and it hit all the reasons why we felt like it was important to start the podcast, because it was about having conversations about perspectives that we did not know but wanted to be open to, wanted to have an understanding of, and we had a great conversation. So this week, Jake could not be with us. And one of the first people we thought of was you, for a couple of reasons. One is you're a swell guy. We like you from that perspective. But the second of which is you actually recommended this week's guest.
I did. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this one. I would have been looking forward to it anyway. But this is just a sort of a double treat. Absolutely. Do you tell him who he is, or how do we do this?
Well, I think we hint at it for a minute or two just to whet the appetite, and then we jump in. But one of the conversations you and I were having right before we went live here was the idea that when we started this podcast, it was pretty strictly about musicians talking about social issues and community building from the perspective of being musicians. And we've slowly started moving this into sort of a different place where really it's the community building and the community care. Like, because community building, the problem with community building, when you use that as a phrase, is a lot of people can see that as almost being like a PR activity or
it's a little imprecise, right? Like you almost imagine, I guess, like sort of Harold Hill doing the Music Man. He brings in the instruments and that's it, and then he takes off and skips town and does it all again. And there are maybe people who do that.
Certainly. The monorails. Sorry, Simpson callback, had to go with it. Those things happen, but the people that we really wanted to start really focusing on were people that basically had a calling of sorts, and whether they made it their profession or not, they saw something that they deemed needed attention on a fundamental human level, and moved in that direction. I think this week's guest is unquestionably one of those people. So I will let you introduce this week's guest as someone that knows him better than I do.
Oh boy, I am totally prepared and not at all ad-libbing it. Yeah,
I can do it if you'd like.
I'm really looking forward to this.
We both know I'm going to talk enough, so I may.
I met our next guest. I guess it's a couple of years now. A couple of years back on a West Coast tour with my band Gangsta Grass. I was out there. And we hooked up with this great guest MC who ended up doing a run of shows with us in the Pacific Northwest region, and he turned out to be a great performer, an artist. He also turned out to be a great person, and we sort of later learned that he's one of these community care people that you're talking about. He's been working on an organization called Taking Ownership PDX, where he works with homeowners, black homeowners in the Portland area where he lives, and helps fix up their homes and do the kind of minor repairs that keeps them in their homes, which supports the community. He's in a band called Speaker Minds, excellent hip hop band out there. He was recently on a track on our Gangsta Grass album. And that's our show for tonight, folks. Good night. I don't know how much to cover and how much to get to later, but I guess we can just bring him in.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Randal Wyatt. So happy to have him on here.
Oh, and there you
That's,
are.
that's, that's one of the, yeah, there we go. That was one of the best intros I've ever had. Daniel, thank you, man.
And again,
Oh,
I
wait, Jake?
got the wrong name there.
Oh
Not
wait, yeah,
Jake.
I'm back to Jake again.
There we go.
I'm guest hosting.
Yeah. Right on. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here, Randal. Really appreciate it, especially because when I initially reached out, you didn't. I don't know how well you knew the connection through Dan, so it was just this weird guy being like, "Hey, you wanna be on a podcast?" So I just appreciate you responding.
No problem, man. I'm taking all the opportunities, and then when you name drop Danjo, yeah, I had to come through.
Honestly, our pleasure. It was, as I said early on, we were really working on sort of this transition from sort of strictly talking about musicians and their view on the world, and talking more about people that are really on the ground doing real community work. Not that musicianship isn't community work; it absolutely can and often is, but there is a difference between fan building and relationship building on a fan level, and community building and community need. And man, like everything that I've read up about you, and this is the first time we got to talk, so I'm this is weird because I'm getting to a point where like I've been in the music world long enough that I don't often do the starstruck thing when I meet other musicians. But I'm starting to get that way about people doing things like what you're doing. And I like it. It's really awe-inspiring, man.
Oh, man. Thank you, man. That's a hell of a compliment. For real.
So can you sort of introduce Taking Ownership? How long, what was sort of the genesis of this? Like, what was this something that you had already sort of had a hand in doing this kind of work on a personal basis, and then you sort of transitioned it into a literal company, or how did that work?
Honestly, no. This just happened like kind of organically. This is not a field I've ever worked in. I actually come from the mental health field. Before all this, I was a student advocate, which kind of played the role of a school counselor at a nonprofit job readiness program called Portland Youth Builders. And before that, I was a mentor for Black and Latino youth on probation. So I was helping Black and Latino youth transition off probation. So I've worked in the judicial and mental health and social service realm. So, I built connects that way. Also through music, I've always used my music as like a niche for like philanthropy work. So I was always using hip hop, what was just putting together like a fundraiser, benefit concert or something like that. So I always, found a way to melt the two together. That's kind of how I actually got into social services. I got jobs working as a counselor without a degree because of the amount of work I used to do as a hip hop artist and activist. But this just kind of happened because, I'm also a student at Portland State University finishing my bachelor's in social science, sociology, and Black studies. So I speak out. I'm pretty open about like social injustices and communities that are marginalized. And people know that in my community. I've been able to make quite a name for myself doing that. So when the climate changed, when George Floyd was murdered and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, those cases came out, people reached out and were like, how can we be a better ally for these communities that are marginalized, and in particular with me, the Black community. And I just was like, really the best way is to give us your money and and resources. I mean, to be real, it's like when a community's been historically and currently excluded from economic opportunities and oppressed, to the point where they're hundreds of years behind in the ability to build generational wealth. Yeah, that's what you're going to have to do. It's going to take equity. It's going to take giving us something. And so I just figured, why not do it in the, I'm a firm believer in reparations. And I said, why don't we do it in the form of home repairs? and attempt to keep the Black community alive in Portland, because it's been pretty decimated over the years.
Yeah, and I know from an East Coast perspective, I don't live in Boston proper anymore. I used to live right outside. Now I'm up in I think the town I currently live in. There's like a human to cow ratio that is relatively. I mean, it's a little boony, which I adore. But our guest last episode, Catherine Morris, who is dear friend, she started Boston Arts and Music Soul music festival and concert series, basically on a relatively similar idea, where she knew that there was this community, but knew that the places, the traditionally Black and brown spaces for performance, for presentation, had really just deteriorated. The town had stopped caring about them, stopped upkeeping them. So, one of the examples she gave us in the episode was, a white artist that had a Grammy nomination, whether they won or not, would end up playing this beautiful 500 to 1,000 person room that was upkept and fantastic, and a Black artist with numerous Grammy wins under their belt were relegated to these broken down theaters that weren't upkept, weren't really safe, not from a person perspective, but from a building code perspective. And she sort of made it her goal to take that notion of community fostered rebuilding and focused on that on our side. So that was another reason I was really excited to talk to you, because we just had that conversation. I think what you're doing, from my relatively uneducated perspective, is a extension of that. Instead of moving it out of the arts and music side, you're coming with an arts and music side to it, but you are getting into the physical. What do you need to survive? What does a community literally need to survive?
Yeah, and what do you need to get the city off your ass? And that was the big reason why I started this. Was really, I didn't expect. I came into this really not expecting it to become my job. I really wasn't sure it was going to become an actual organization or any of that. I was really just, trying to stir some shit up and get the city, light a fire under the city's ass, and be like, look, how am I doing this shit? Why aren't you doing this? You have a lot more resources than I do. But come to find out, when you got a whole community behind you, you can come up with quite a bit of resources and actually make a real impact.
I love that, man. And I've really enjoyed, I've been fortunate to, since we met, I guess it was probably a couple of years ago, but I've been able to I've been following you on social media, and you've been very, very explicit about I'm going to go fix this roof today. I could either spend a few hours fixing a roof or spend a few hours figuring out how to get a permit to fix this roof. Yes, I'm going to fix the roof and figure all that out later. Now I feel like I should probably make this into a company. Well, don't know how to do that, but all, today seems like I need to take this next step. And it's just been really, really inspiring to, you really show the work. Obviously all of it's work, but what I mean by that is you really show every step in the process. It's not like you just magically, birthed this thing into the world. You really just, every day seems like another realization of, I guess I should do this. This seems like it would be a helpful next step.
Yeah. And it never ends. Been really struggling with this 501c3 status, man, the nonprofit status. That thing is tedious, but we're almost there. But yeah, definitely has been, because I didn't have a plan for this. It literally was just it chose me. It just happened. I'm so thankful for so many reasons. This has been so beneficial to me too. It's made a great impact, but it's been so beneficial to me in a number of ways. So yeah, with no plan, it's just been flying by the seat of my pants and just building the plane while we're flying,
And it makes sense, you say no plan, and I know it can seem that way, but you really, when you look at it in the context of your previous work, and I didn't know that about you, that you'd been a social worker and worked in mental health, and it makes total sense to me that you would have gotten into physically fixing people's homes from, working on people in a social emotional way. That would be just sort of a natural transition. I feel like I've met a number of musicians Let me know if this resonates with either of you, but I feel like I've met a number of musicians, like really good, top of their craft. They're so good. And then you talk to them like, so what's next? Well, I was thinking about getting out of music and becoming a social worker. I feel like I've had that conversation multiple times with people I really respect who are so good. And to me, it seems like what it is if they were in music to try to reach people in one way, they kind of, maybe maxed out, or they just, had came to a certain point and said, what other way can I do? And it sort of seems like maybe that's what you did was, I want to help people. Well, what about generational wealth? What about the literal home that they live in? That seems like a natural next step to take. So, I mean, I get you say there wasn't a plan, but at the same time, like there's a really grand order to all of it.
Yeah, I guess I was more prepared than I thought, but I hear you on that. I definitely know a lot of musicians who work in education or social services for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think they do go hand in hand when you talk about expression and community. But yeah, I definitely hear you on that.
Yeah.
There's also this wonderful, even though the worlds sort of live in separate spaces, they feed off each other in the same way. Where the experience that you get in the social service and the nonprofit, you are literally devoting yourself to a service-based thing. Entertainment, you can argue it's not service-based, but it is certainly serving something. You are serving, an audience. You are serving an expression. Finding the way to sort of tie that together. Like again, I totally understand where Dan was coming from with that notion that pursuing the notion of going from being on stage and conveying something to literally picking up a hammer. And I also love just the ability. There are a lot of musicians I know that have the greatest of intentions and will get up on stage and will talk about all of the things they care about and all of the things that they think all the ways they think the world should be. But to actually pick up the hammer and go out and do it, I hate to say it, but there's a discrepancy between the two. There's a lot of talk and there's not as much walk. And to literally do that, being like, well, I don't know how permits work, but this needs getting done. There's something to that.
Yeah, and I'll also say at the time I was pretty pissed off, with everything going on in the world. So I was just like, screw the red tape. I was just like, I really wanted to stir some shit up. I had an opportunity. People were listening to me. People were reaching out to me. So I was like, shoot, this is the time to like try to stir some stuff up. And yeah, it just kind of ballooned into this. And yeah, you're absolutely right too, Dan, Joe, when you say, the mental health and the home piece they're so correlated, they're so associated. If you don't have, I think it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I mean, if you don't have proper shelter, food, and how are you going to take care of, needs like your mental health, self-care, things like that. So yeah, it definitely was something that I learned through my studies at PSU as well. But man, so many times when I saw when I was working in the mental health field, a person's environment that they're coming from plays a major role in their mental wellness.
And one of your examples in the video that we played, sort of the Taking Ownership manifesto video, for lack of a better term, that we ran, one of the first people that you interview is talking about the fact that the work that you did, helping to clean up the yard, helping to clean up the landscape, helping to fix the roof, for that person, that was a literalization of the depression that they were in. They were in a literal depression, and you could physically see the depression manifesting.
It's symbolic, yes.
Yeah, in the space around them, and there is absolutely powerful truth.
Yeah. It's really powerful seeing those individual examples. And I don't know if you want to talk a little bit, I don't want to spend too much time on the 101 stuff, but just to kind of make that connection back with generational wealth in sort of the big picture, just for people who haven't necessarily thought about this in this way. You're doing basic repairs on homes. I mean, you're not necessarily making like hundreds of thousands of dollars of improvements to places, but you're doing basic repairs, and the goal is to keep people in their homes and in home ownership. And can you just sort of spell out like what's the connection there between equity and generational wealth for people who haven't really thought about that with the Black community in particular?
Yeah, I mean, the way that the displacement has gone is Well, once the vacancy rate got so low in Portland, it was so low for a long time. They were able to just, and people were moving in, and they're like, "Wow, this is a cheap city," so they're buying up stuff, and then it's raising the property taxes, and a new season comes into a neighborhood, which is like the mark of the beast, which is a health food store out here. Once that comes in, you already know what's about to happen to your community. So property taxes go up, and these are already people who. Are the working class, or we might call working poor, where they can pay their bills, but they can't do the extra stuff, the maintenance on their homes. And now your neighborhood has changed around you. Maybe what was once a more diverse or a black neighborhood, now you have a bunch of white neighbors. And I mean, to be honest, white culture is a little more vain about their homes and about their communities around them. They care about the cosmetics and
the nice green grass lawn, right?
What's that?
Freshly the green grass lawn, freshly trimmed and the and everything.
And they got to make sure their neighbors' home is up to par as well. And unfortunately, they haven't approached these situations with much compassion. More so, it's just like, I'm gonna go tell on you. And so they call the city, and the city will come out and put liens on the home and fine them for this, because their garage has paint chipping off it or something like that. Instead of going over there and being like, hey, I see your garage needs a paint. Can we help in some way? What's going on? Like, how come you're not able to get around to this? That's what taking ownership is about. But that has contributed largely to how this black community has been displaced. And then there's so many other issues that are actually more of the disease. I'm talking about more of the symptoms. But like when we talk about underemployment and unemployment rates, and all things like that. And also, developers, predatory developers that come in once they're in this situation, and they're like, "Hey, here's $300,000 cash. I heard you had a lien on your home." They're going to take the money, and then all of a sudden they don't have their house, and they realize, "Damn, I can't really buy another house, or I'll be house poor." It goes into that. These developers also come in and they have a different set of rules than homeowners do. Like they can just build a building and not really even ask the community what they need, and or put forth resources that the community once needed. They might just eliminate those after school programs or rec centers or whatever you have it. They come in and they build these 20, 30 unit buildings in what was once a residential neighborhood, and that raises up utilities, that raises up property value, and sooner or later that's the type of stuff that's really caused the gentrification in all cities. Really, I mean, this is happening all over the country.
Oh yeah, that's not unique to Portland at all. I think that's
not unique.
People in the East Coast can definitely understand what you're talking about.
It's been very blatant in Portland, and the reason why is because our black community is so small. Anyways, this is literally the whitest city in America. Big city in America. So it's you. So when you already have a small community and you see it go away, I mean, it's we noticed. I mean, at least me as a black person in Portland, I noticed. So yeah, and so these families are losing homes, and the best way to build generational wealth and keep equity in your family is to own homes. And they turned a lot over the last 15 years. They've turned a lot of black homeowners into renters, into tenants.
Yeah, and that inevitably is bad for any community. I lived in Springfield, Mass for a number of years. And this wasn't a black-white thing. This was essentially initially an Italian community that had a bunch of old Victorian homes, large homes out there, and same thing. There was a development of sort of the downtown area that drove up cost of living prices everywhere. None of the homes were upkept. All of the people that were in there initially either moved up or moved out, and now it is become this space that is like there's no health to it. It has become a space where people will go in, live for a couple of years, but the house is already falling apart, and there's no one coming in to really put in that effort. And I should be fair. I haven't lived out there for about 7 or 8 years, and the casinos just went in, so that may have made it even worse. or better. I don't know.
Maybe, or maybe they put in a Whole Foods. I think that's the new seasons of the East Coast would be a Whole
Yeah,
Foods.
we have those too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. That's a sign. That's a
Yeah.
real sign something's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, and talking about the Black community in Portland, I think is important too, because I mean, not a joke, but I feel like people might hear that and go, Black community? What Black community in Portland? And it's small, right? But it nonetheless deserving of to live where people have been living, and have some continuity there and not have to be displaced. And I feel like, I don't know, I feel like Portland is one of those places. Now I'm on the East Coast, right? But it's one of those places that gets, would you say, grossly misrepresented in popular culture, also the news. I mean, this year, you guys definitely had a moment there of being kind of front page breaking CNN news for a little bit, but then you go and you turn it on and it's like they've zoomed into like half of one block downtown and they're like, Portland's on fire. What's going on over there? And I reached out to you. I was like, hey man, what's going on over there? Is Portland on fire? And you were like, no.
But I'm proud of them for going out there and making some noise and stuff. I'm happy for them because they made some national noise, and we got some demands and some policies that we're presenting to some politicians and getting heard, and so I mean we had to do that type of stuff. That's how it always goes down historically, and yeah. So but it's not. We're definitely misrepresented. The Black community of Portland is never really shown in media. I mean, when I was a kid, if you even heard Portland on TV outside of your local channels, it was blow your mind. You're like, what? They even know we exist? And everybody's calling us Oregon instead of Oregon. And so but now we actually, since Portlandia, I would say Portlandia put us on the map, and they really highlighted our kind of granola, hipster movement that was growing exponentially at that time. So that's what's very associated with Portland, which is fine. I'm not mad at that, other than the fact that it's causes significant gentrification. But we have a ton of health food stores. That's great. I'm happy that we don't have food deserts here. We have a lot of options in this city. Food is great in this city.
That is a good thing for people to not have a
problem
food
desert. They're not investing into these diverse communities. Instead, they've been only investing when white people move into these areas and make them healthy and bring these. So that's the problem when we see that. And so there's definitely, it's been some funny representation of Portland, especially this past year.
Yeah, man.
There's sort of the long history, and we could go down a whole rabbit's hole of the way the media in general misrepresents really anything in sort of the 24 news hour cycle, and how they need to elevate everything and turn, that the story of, the entire house is on fire is like, no, the guy was burning leaves in the backyard. Like there's just an escalation to the way it needs to be done. Comes back to, the first time I remember being aware of it was when we went back into Iraq back in 2002, 2003, and that all of those videos of them toppling the statue of Saddam Hussein, and all of the camera shots were made to make it look like this was thousands of people. And then about 2 weeks later, there was footage released of someone literally just standing about 100 feet back, and it was clear that this giant mob was 20 people. It wasn't remotely what it was being represented.
And so, maybe within that, assuming that there will always be media forces or, real estate speculator forces or whatever, however you want to look at it, that are always going to be sort of misrepresenting people and skewing and spinning. Maybe then there's like this mission to fight that and constantly have to work to accurately represent, especially people in communities who more often get misrepresented. Do you feel like that's sort of become more of a central part of your work in what you do, where you're also working on just the general visibility, the general representation, or is it? Do you still feel like it's more important to just get the work done, just fix somebody's house, because that's sort of a more tangible thing?
I think the raising of awareness is just as important as getting the work done. I think that's been a huge part of what taking ownership's been able to do. Is that's like when I said I wanted to stir shit up and get the city, get the city involved. It was like, well, look at all this. Now we're sitting at like 99 families on our list right now. There's a lot of. I had no idea it was going to be like that. I was very naive when I hopped into this, but like, there's a lot of people out there that need help. And I mean, you can see it in just how they're acting with these stimulus checks. Like you got to pull teeth to get assistance in this country, man. And so, yeah, I think that's just as important. That's exactly what I was trying to do. We even on our Instagram, and we have even some slides about stats and percentages about predatory lending and how this impacted what gentrification and redlining looks like, historical information about why is Portland the whitest city in America? Because Oregon was designed to be a white utopia. They literally didn't let Black people live here, and in particular, Black people to live here until 1926 or own property or anything. So that's like a huge gap between who's been able to buy land and who hasn't. So so it's definitely educating and raising awareness is a major part of this whole movement.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, and I don't want to like blaze right by it. Just to go back again, like if people are familiar with the concept of redlining, as in like different neighborhoods, this part of the wrong side of the tracks, like these people have to live here, and that was an explicit thing at one time that then over time turns into, well, I don't know, I was just born here. We don't have redlining anymore, but you have this generational redline that's set in. But that's separating individual towns. But just say that again about the history of Oregon, just all of Oregon.
That's what Oregon was, I think, established in 1856. But I know people were obviously living here, coming in here earlier than that. But yeah, they weren't allowing any people of color. I think maybe they allowed Asians. I'm not sure. I don't have all the details, but I know they weren't letting Black people live or own property or even stay in this state, even if they're free, till 1926. And so if they were even here for longer than, every week they would get like a whipping in the streets if they were here during that time when they weren't allowed here. So that that's important to understand. That's definitely played a role. And then once they did allow us to buy property, redlining was prevalent. They were like, okay, y'all can live in this small area. But not a lot of people moved here because we had the highest KKK involvement in any state for a long time too. So Black people were like, we're not living here, rightfully so. And then once World War II started and they started building ships, we had this place called Vanport, which was like a kind of a small island. Well, it's not an island, but it was down level with the river. They moved in there. Big flood happened. All Black people had to move out, or all the people that were living there. It was a very diverse community, but once the white people moved out, they could buy property wherever they wanted. Black people only could buy property in one small area called Albina, where I actually just bought this house in that neighborhood. And
congratulations.
Thank you. I'll tell you the story of that. It's pretty wild.
Yeah.
But maybe you saw it. But so then that's what the red line was. They were only going to be able to give, given loans in these certain areas, which, played a big role, that white people had a larger area to buy property. And that also played a role and moved a lot of people out. And then they were like, well, we need a interstate going through here, and we need a mall, and we need a hospital. We got to move all the Black people out of there and build it there. So they're constantly displacing us. And so, I mean, it's hard to call a place home when you constantly get removed,
Yeah. And I'm sorry to drag you up and just have you, do the history lesson. It's really important stuff, and I think people need to hear it. But maybe we should focus a little bit on more on you. I mean, you mentioned you just recently became a homeowner yourself. You're a dad. You've talked a lot about mental health, and you're a musician. I don't know. We could kind of go in any of those directions.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't mind giving the history of Oregon. I think a lot of people need to understand that. And I think, that's so important. That's not getting taught in the schools. Type of things was happening all over the country. The history is not taught properly in our schools, especially in public school. I'm a public school kid. And so
Yep.
when you don't understand like how the history and how it still impacts and resonates today, you're not going to understand why we call for reparations. You're not going to understand why equity is important, because a lot of you think, oh, slavery was so long ago, but no, there is still one. Not only is there like the economic factors that played a role in that, but there's also the epigenetic factors. Like people got to understand that you carry genes on. You carry these stressors, you carry these fears and things on to your next generation, and that also comes from that. Slavery was heinous. People don't understand how vicious chattel slavery was, and that type of stuff plays a role in the trauma of the community. So I think I will always be down to talk about that because people need to hear that.
It's a funny thing because last year in the entertainment world, you had these two shows that were like last 2 years, these two shows that were widely regarded as some of the best things that were produced on TV in a long time, in Lovecraft Nation and in HBO's Watchmen. Both of those series heavily featured Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the history of Black Wall Street and what happened there. And the number of people I know, educated people that care about this kind of stuff, that thought it was funny that the two shows were copying this fake thing off each other.
Ooh.
Because they didn't get that this is absolutely part of our history.
Real history.
And to your point, like that's one of the reasons why the history should always be talked about. And for all of my fellow white people that hear the word reparations and are like, oh, that was so long ago, whatever, the understanding of generational trauma, of generational poverty, and how that affects you, especially when you are encountering redlining, when you're encountering all of those factors that have basically wiped out so much. And that's really, I hate to harp on these things again from a white perspective, but white privilege, like that's what white privilege is. The fact that we aren't inheriting so much of that. We can be inheriting parts. Just because you're white doesn't mean you aren't familiar with being poor. Just because you're white doesn't mean you haven't faced trauma. But the difference is, if you are black and you have come from this country and you are multi-generational in this country, you have. There's some part of your history that you can point to.
Yeah,
with
very few interact.
Sure. And one thing that I often try to explain with white privilege is like that's just one privilege. That it's a big privilege. It's a huge one in this country. It goes a long way. But there's also the privilege of being. I always talk about my privileges. I'm a male in this country. I'm heterosexual. I'm tall and people think I'm good looking.
Tall guy. Yeah.
There's so many privileges. I'm light skinned compared to dark skinned. That colorism is a very real thing. So there's so many things. I always say there's so many privileges, and that's what white privilege is. Just that if you have pale skin and you fit into the social construct that is white, that was created in the 1700s, you benefit from it. But it doesn't mean your life is good. And it also means that you were tricked into believing that you should just be proud of being white just because you're white. And you fell for it. And they did a fantastic job of doing that to people with pale skin.
And you hear people say, okay, well, but race isn't real. It's made up. It was made up. It was made up. But then these repercussions are very, very real.
Very real.
And they're not over. And for people thinking that, well, okay, slavery was so long ago, it was not so long ago. When you have living people whose grandparents were around then, I mean, what do you say to that? Like that is zero time. That is yesterday. That is a second ago. So
and there's still people eating off of cotton money. There's still families that have got huge estates off of cotton money. So.
Yeah.
My college roommate and dear friend, his father was not born into the Holocaust, but was born into a family that was literally fleeing through Russia and running from everything in that time period. And because he and I are very close, and I'm very close to his folks, who are wonderful folks, having that history passed down just makes you even more furious when you run into people that claim things like the Holocaust didn't happen, or racism doesn't matter, or like this doesn't affect. And it's like, man, just because you don't know something does not mean it doesn't exist.
Exactly.
Right. And there's two groups of people, ultimately when it comes to somebody saying, oh, that didn't happen. There's the people, like you said, Randall, who, if you didn't learn about it, maybe you don't know about it. And whether that's an excuse, whether ignorance of historical fact is an excuse or not is maybe up for debate. But, and then there's the other group, which is, willful deniers. And that's a very different thing. I think we see that with everything that's going on in these, in these DC terrorist riots, right? You have people who go down there who are misled, and then you have people who are doing the misleading. And those are, I would argue, they're different crimes. But that's just why education is so important, because you don't want to be the person who really doesn't know about it, and then you end up on the side of somebody who's really trying to mislead you and actively use that history to hurt people.
Absolutely. I mean, it's the ones that are willfully ignorant understand the system, who it was created for, and have benefited from it, and want to continue to benefit from it, and will take as much as they can until the people demand change. I mean, that's, when people talk about slavery being a long time ago, okay, sure, if you want to say that, which is not true, but what about Jim Crow? Jim Crow was in the 1960s.
Yeah. What about Reconstruction? What about all of those things?
So, recent. Yeah, very, very recent stuff. So, so they understand, and it always takes the people finally figuring out, oh, this system is rigged. It's only helping certain people, but it's always going to be pulling teeth. It's always going to be pulling teeth to change the system, because there's always going to be willfully ignorant people. I don't even like to call them that, because they know what they're doing and they're smart. These are smart people.
There are people that are bought into the system.
Right, they bought into it.
Regardless of whether they believe, as a white person or as anything, I am better than a black person or anything, whether they believe it or not, they see the value in propagating it, in making that the story, because it puts money in their pockets. It makes
how can you not do the math? You have to be doing the math. Like, you understand blind spots. Like, we think blind spot, well, I had no way of seeing that. It's the corner of your eye. Like, you're sort of averting your gaze just a little bit, just so I don't have to look straight at it.
Yeah,
but it's there, and it's there.
And a lot of white families too. They've passed on this narrative of dehumanizing black people too. That's what they've had to do. They've had to teach that when you have your little kids at a lynching. You got to think about these lynchings where there's family gathering. It's community gatherings of white people. Now you have these little kids, and you got to teach them that that's not human. Like, that's not a human being there. So that gets passed on, and that's the big thing, is like, we got to continue to humanize ourselves and if you don't have exposure to diversity, which is something white people can do in this country, you can live in a small town and not have any exposure. You're going to continue to feel that the media is not going to represent us well, like you said. That definitely plays a role. And then acceptance, right? A lot of these people how many people do you know that vote a certain side just because their family did? I mean, I know quite a few, or that say what they say just to not get ostracized from their community.
Yeah, and as a touring musician, I'm so thankful, when it comes to diversity and exposure. I mean, I grew up in DC, and I'm thankful for that, but not in a particularly diverse neighborhood of DC, but still, being in a city is definitely something for that. But then getting to tour and travel, that's where I heard about the Tulsa Greenwood air raid, firebombing. That's also where when I went down to Wilmington, North Carolina, that's where I heard about that, which just now everybody's starting to talk about that, because it was the last time that something like the raid on the Capitol happened. I had heard about that when I went down there, and just out of nowhere, like, what happened in Wilmington? They drove everybody out. They killed everybody. Like, and this is real history. but I'm really thankful to get to, travel around and be exposed to so much of this stuff. But
Absolutely.
I wanted to circle back to something you just said about, obviously, like, real, like, racial hatred is trained, is passed down through families. But even something less than that, let's say, okay, so you're hearing this and thinking, I would never, teach my child to like lynch someone and see them as less than human. Okay, but let's take it back a little bit to home ownership, and you think, okay, so we have this lovely house, and when I die, I'll pass it on to my kid, and then my kid, wow, gee, why do we have this wonderful house? Well, we deserve it. We're good people, and things just worked out for us, providence, and it's great. It's a wonderful thing. This is a great country, and you hear that, and it's not explicitly we are better than those people, but you have to ask yourself, do you deserve your house more than somebody else who doesn't have their house? And if you're saying that, if you're telling that story, where does that really come from?
Not
Right.
explicit, but powerfully implicit.
Yeah.
Like there's no way there's no way to tell the story that we were successful because we pulled ourselves up by the bootstraps, because we worked hard, without there being an in completely obvious implication that, and they're where they are because they didn't.
Right.
And that is the fallacy that propagates so much generational racism, where you get that it doesn't need to be gay people, black people, whatever people are bad. It just needs to be, this is why we're successful and they aren't, because,
Right.
we were the ones that deserved
and you
it.
can start thinking about that. Even you don't have to have anyone tell it to you. You just look around and you just, you spin this story for yourself, and you think, gosh, why are things this way? Either there's gross injustice, systemically throughout history, or I'm just better.
Yeah.
Which is more convenient.
Oh yeah.
We live in this capitalist society that's predicated on competition, and then we idolize rich people. Like Forbes is just like a magazine full of people that take advantage of everyday people. Really, I mean, some of them not. I mean, some people maybe made their money legit, but yeah, I mean, that's what we do. We idolize these rich people. We're completely competitive, and so we think, well, everybody has a fair chance, right? Everybody can do this. Pull yourself up. But yeah, it's not. We don't account into these systemic factors very often.
Yeah.
So-
Which is
so I
why
don't mean to-
yeah. Go ahead.
I was about to say, I don't mean to hard pivot, but we asked a question earlier about you, Randall, because you had a heck of you're a heck of a guy, and all these subjects are wonderful, and we could talk for hours. We honestly could talk for hours about them, and we will have you back, and we will keep talking about these things, because I think these are great subjects. But I'm really excited because when Dan initially suggested talking to you, I did the Facebook stalking. I was like, all right, so what's this guy about? And fell down the hole into Taking Ownership, and tried to start getting to know a little bit about your music. And I'm like, oh, this guy's totally, like, across the board really interesting. This will be a fun conversation. And then was it a month ago that you announced the house?
Yeah, it was about a month and a half ago. We closed on this house December 4th. I moved in on the 5th of December. A very unique situation. If you want me to tell the story,
Please.
A woman, a very generous and successful, and definitely like a woman that understands what's going on. She reached out to me through Taking Ownership and was like, "Hey, I have a house that's in the Albina neighborhood, which is a historically black neighborhood, and I would really love to sell my house to a family color, and I don't want to make any money. I just want to sell it for what's left on the mortgage. I just want to do my part on putting a black or POC family back into the Albina neighborhood." And I actually ignored her first email. I was like, whatever, she's bullshitting. And she reached back out like a week and a half later. It was like, "Hey, I'm serious about this. I really want to do this." So I was like, well, I'll take you up on this. Damn, this was huge because, a couple of years prior, I was going through first time home buying program through an organization out here, and I went through about half of it before I was looking at houses in my price range on a single income with two sons. There's nothing I could get. Everything would have been just a shithole, and I would have had to pour just as much money into repairing it than I would have actually buying a home. So I took her up on it. She was legit about this, and we went through the process, and we weren't, it was smooth, and she sold me her house and gifted me a substantial amount of equity by selling it to me for what's left on the mortgage, and honestly changed the whole trajectory of my life. Really, I mean, with my two sons, I've been really focused on becoming a homeowner, and I still had plans to do this in a different way. So this was just a huge opportunity.
Yeah,
that's something.
I couldn't have been happier for you. And it was such a great story where you devoted yourself to a really worthwhile cause publicly. You basically said this is something that is plaguing my community, that's plaguing our community as a whole. We need to do what we can to support the people living here, and then to have someone that I would certainly never define her as part of the problem, but someone who was part of sort of that gentrification model, was part of that coming in, saw, understood, and sort of respectfully looked at it and said, all right, well, I've benefited off this. How can I give that benefit back in a tangible way? I mean, that's immensely powerful. And
yeah, next level. It was next level activism and philanthropy work, and she has a group of other radical philanthropists that are looking to do more work. So we're hoping to get this word out, and I think that post got the word out. It actually got quite a few views and shares and things. But yeah, amazing. And she is a part of the problem, and we all are a part of the problem in a lot of ways. We all perpetuate the system. We all have to play the game, and it's not like we, unless we were all just ready to tear this shit down and rebuild it, then we all got to play the game and perpetuate the system in a way. And she recognized she benefits. She didn't put herself out. She owns another home. She's a successful business owner. Mm-hmm. And yeah, she just did. She even said to me, the two big things that stood out to me when I was like, "Are you serious about this?" She was like, "Well, yes, it's going to make me feel more human, and I hate capitalism." That's the two things. I loved it. I was like,
and she still sold it to you, but she sold it for what was left on the mortgage, which is really wonderful. And it kind of reminds me back again to sort of this fundamental difference between renting and owning. And of course, a lot of people who have the means to do both, to do either, go back and forth on this. And there's a lot of people who choose to rent because it makes more sense for them, at whatever time or wherever they live. And that's perfectly fine. However, when we talk about, wealth, generational wealth and equity, that's one of the big differences, though you mentioned several. I mean, you mentioned a sense of community ownership and stability, which are arguably as important or more important. But when you think about equity, you pay rent every month. You pay, if you own a home, you pay property tax and other insurance and stuff every month. But you pay the mortgage, and that's equity that you own, that you're getting back and holding on to. So, the way, like, her selling that home for what's left on the mortgage is kind of like as if she had been the renter and paying on the house for so many years, and it makes equity seem like this sort of arbitrary magical thing. Like, who says that, like, one person gets equity and the other person, I'm the landlord owner and you're the renter, and we're both paying, but I'm the one that ends up with all the equity money at the end of it. It just seems like such a strange thing, and it's so nice when it can be equalized in that very simple, straightforward way. I mean, have you heard of anybody else who's coming forward to try to do what she did?
No, I don't know anybody personally. I mean, I've had a couple people. I've actually had one person say they had somebody doing the same. Has somebody doing the same thing for them. Now, I hear that this is something that happens amongst families, sometimes,
well, of course,
or close friends or something, but
never the house.
Yeah, it's never been. I guess I don't know of it being racially motivated. like this was. And to kind of piggyback onto what you're saying about renting, look, being better for some people, and I've been in that situation, but that's because of the society we live in, right? Renting's only better because you don't want to go into a situation where your house poor and you lose your house, right? Or you can't afford the mortgage. So that's why people pick renting. But in the grand scheme of things, you want to own property. You want that stability. I've been a renter my entire adult life. With my two sons, I've been the father of my two sons since I was 19. And I've lived with them in about 11 or 12 different places. There's no stability. When I was growing up, my parents bought a home together, and I lived in 2 different houses growing up that they owned. So yeah, this was definitely I definitely rented because it worked for me at the time. But when this opportunity came up where I can actually get a home and own it at an affordable price, where my mortgage is actually lower than my rent was, of course, you're not going to pass that up. Yeah, only worth it. Right.
And I think, just to take Dan's point and extrapolate it out, it's not simply the illusionary difference between renting and owning. It is that specific part that you're bringing up right now, which is stability. If you own something, you own something. If you rent something, it can be taken away.
Yep.
And there are hundreds and hundreds of ways that can happen. And as a family unit, I think you're alluding to, and I know my ex-wife was an Army brat, and we talked about her upbringing pretty frequently, and the fact that she moved repetitively and what that meant in the destability. Her great parents, loving parents, but parents that were doing everything they could to give a sense of stability through that process that is by its nature unstable.
Yeah, because community is so important, and that's really where my mindset has been at, and that's why Taking Ownership was something I wanted to start, because it's literally the antithesis of the capitalistic individualistic mindset. It's we need each other, and yeah, I can go ahead and go out there and go get me a 6-figure job in a cubicle and take care of, not doing anything rewarding or for the community, and take care of my immediate family and everything in my home. But this is why I started doing philanthropy and community activism so young, is because I caught on really early and becoming a father early helps too, that my kids are going to be out in the community much more. They're going to be out home, unless we have a pandemic. But but yeah, they're going to be out there. Not to mention, I just care about other people. But I mean, if we're talking about my family, they need community. They need friends. I remember how much, and still to this day, how much friends meant to me growing up. Having people that I can actually choose to be with. I don't choose my family, but I love my family. But yeah, so yeah, you know what I'm saying. So yeah, it's definitely important.
And just again, the notion of generational wealth, everything that we talked about is all a compounding factor that changes the way anyone's life, any family unit over time is going to be able to interact with the outside world. The difference between renting a place, changing every couple of years, not really knowing your neighbors versus having a level of stability, knowing your neighbors well enough to know I can count on Michael and Nancy next door if I need something. The compounding value of that, it's another factor that just feeds into all of this.
Yeah, and changing schools, man. As a kid, that's the big one.
Yeah.
Because if you got to change schools, I changed a few schools and it was so tough. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, that impacts your ability to absorb information, your education.
Yep.
Yeah, it's true.
Where you are in the school when you change, the school system's it's very clear that every school system is not built the same. They are not in the same place. They're not there's so much to that process that it again, it's a disruption. It is a life disruption.
And just to mention it here, I don't know, I think about this because I live in the New York City area and I hear New York City news on the radio, and they talk sometimes about the school systems and the way that they're funded. And then somebody comes on and is like, I'm in New Jersey and we fund our schools with our property taxes. And the New Yorkers are like, what?
Really? Well, how does New York fund their schools?
I don't understand. I don't know. But the point is that everybody else does, like,
Right.
and that's just, again, that's, you know, one more example of you know, just why home ownership and home values and property taxes, you know, ties back into, you know, your kid's school experience.
Property taxes also fund a significant amount of the police departments too. So, you know, that may play a role in how they treat certain communities. If certain communities have homeowners, a lot of homeowners, you know. So,
Yeah.
you know, something to think about.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have to say, you know, defund the police. We could just say reallocate the property tax budget.
Right.
Right.
For real. Yeah. We
Like
could do that.
That's money, and it's got to go somewhere. And there's a lot of places it can go.
Yeah. There's a lot of resources out there that could be a lot more preventative than police intervention.
Yeah. So in terms of money too, is it worth asking, just like, are you finding more, you know, individual citizens helping you out? Or are you finding more success with like city budget grant proposals? Like how from a fundraising perspective for, I guess, just for this particular organization or just your work in general, like what do you see as more promising?
So what's been great is we've just gotten like an overwhelming amount of support from just individual communities, just from families, individuals, whatever, what have you. We've had some real estate agencies definitely donate percentages of their sales, things like that, trying to repent their sins. I mean, to be honest,
you know,
I'll definitely take it. No,
When they say it out loud, like
they'll even be the ones to say it. Like they'll be like, "Oh, we know how we played a role in this. We want to contribute to helping out." So we've had a significant amount of realtors and real estate agencies help out. We've just had some organizations do some match campaigns. You know, they'll donate some money. But the thing is, because we're not quite a nonprofit, we haven't really gone for a ton of grants or anything.
right. Yeah, you mentioned that.
And I struggle with grants sometimes because there's a lot of stipulations and a lot they like really want to control how you use your money, and that's kind of what I was trying to avoid, the red tape and all this like stuff. So that's the hard part. What I've really enjoyed about this is that this has been a real major community effort. I mean, we've raised over $250,000 in 6 months from the community, and they've just trusted me and been like, just you know, pour it back into the community and
go do,
yeah, go do you.
That's really
it's been great.
Well, we definitely need to introduce you to Catherine Morris, the woman I was speaking about before, because not only is she just a powerhouse of a human being, she's figured out the grant thing. Like she's the one, you know, I am now in this weird position where I am running a nonprofit organization, an arts nonprofit organization, and she's the one being like, by the way, here's how grants work, and here are 4 that you should go apply for. I'm applying for them too. We'll see how it plays out. But like there is an amazing sort of art form as you talk about that, like because grants are different. The mechanisms behind them are different than public money, but in the same sense, you know, and I know it's been said before, probably far more eloquently than I'm about to. For every good story we hear about the individual who, you know, the 5-year-old who can't afford going to the doctor, and an individual or a company comes in and says, we'll pay the doctor's bill, and everyone's like, oh, good individual. There's the side that you have to take the step back and said, why are we counting on the individual? Like this is
have to do that. Shouldn't there be a network?
Thing,
and it is,
you know?
and it is. That's the one sad thing about what you do is like, why isn't this already getting done? You know, and that is sad. That is, I'm sure you think about that, but like,
absolutely,
that's sad. You shouldn't have to,
especially with as much taxes that they take from us, and we with some of that, you know, I think our income tax, we don't really, because there's not representation. I don't think we really get. They don't have to tell us where that goes. Yeah, so I hear you, and I will say, like, I definitely at some point want to get away from relying on donations from the community. I would love to have state funding or county funding or something like that. And then that would just also help us with giving us a better like idea of what we're going to have every month or every year and how much work we can do, and we can actually promise yeah, we could just communicate better with the families we're serving. Like, this is what we'll be able to do, so.
Yeah.
And
That
in a
sounds
weird
great.
way, because all of this sort of boils down to the notion, sadly, even though we started by talking about how this isn't the goal, all of these actions boil down in some way, shape, or form. There is an economy of marketing and PR that goes into making anything like this work. You need to be able to get in front of people. And the thing about public money as opposed to private money is there's, generally speaking, what comes with it is an immediate attention at a higher level that when parlayed in the right way can lead to more attention and the kind of attention you couldn't really garner without it. Sort of an awkward way, I think, of phrasing it, but you'll get more out of the opportunity of it simply being there.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what has been so beautiful about this public money is I can just kind of go on here and talk as much shit as I want, and I do on the news, all that. I'll say whatever I want. I've worked for a lot of nonprofits in my day with private funders and
Sure.
especially my last job where we worked in the construction realm. So there's a lot of conservative investors and a lot of conservative people on the board. You couldn't speak your mind like you really wanted to with that kind of oversight and that kind of dependency on their funding.
That community funding has that other value then too, because it allows you to be really sort of true and accurate and represent exactly what you want to represent, and add to it that there is that feeling of real tangible community strength, networking, and people wanting to support each other. That there's a lot of value to that, and I think that's something that probably the country needs overall in general. I mean, when you talk about like infrastructure problems in the country, when you talk about this sort of malaise that people have just been sort of isolating themselves and losing community connection, I think what you're doing has a value that goes beyond simply, well, we can get some money from somewhere and do something with it. You really are I think providing an important way for people to even be a community.
Yeah, it's definitely, and especially during this time, where community is so we're starving for it because we miss it so much in the pandemic. So yeah, I'm really thankful that I was able to provide an outlet for the people, because there's a lot of people in my DMs really wanting to figure out how to help, and taking ownership was just like, such a blessing to manifest when it did.
Yeah,
it is kind of astonishing though. What you were able to do was have a really tangible way of reaching out to people in a time period where tangible contact has become essentially forbidden. And for the right reasons. I don't mean that in any kind of like conspiracy kind of way, but like it is. We've been told, and most people have responded with the understanding that to physically go out and do for others right now is on the list of things that you shouldn't be doing. And you kind of did the opposite in a truly loving way.
Yeah, definitely. It worked out. Like I said, it chose me, man.
In a way too, maybe just 'cause I want to go back and say, you don't want to go out and do extraneous things, but at the same time, we have this question around who we deem essential workers, right? And we have all of these categories of essential work that a lot of that comes down to community aid and care. And you say, healthcare workers, law enforcement officers, clearly somebody wearing a uniform, they got to be out there. That's really important. But I think what you're doing is absolutely important. And that's essential. So that's great that you're doing it. I'm envious that you have so many people in your DMs right now. Like that's gotta be worth a lot. Just
it can be a little overwhelming at times.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I like my quiet time and my me time, but that's just me. I have to be better about setting my boundaries, and that's what happens when you start running your own operation. If you don't know how to set boundaries, you'll find yourself working all the time.
That's important too, and you want to talk a little bit about that, because I feel like there are people out there who might feel like, oh, I'll never be able to do this, and then there's a lot of us, during this time that feel like, hey, we got to we gotta start some stuff. Let's start some stuff. And it is potentially a really good opportunity right now to start new things, but that's potentially a pitfall. And with people working from home, I feel like it's harder to self-regulate and set those boundaries. Is there anything that, especially if, you've done work with mental health, that's something that I think you're really familiar with, although it's one thing to help others and another thing to work with yourself.
Yeah.
But what do you feel like you've learned about that, about like finding when your project starts to take off so much and you're like, whoa, hold on, I gotta find a way to balance this that works for me.
Well, when Taking Ownership first started, I don't think I had a great boundaries with it. I was just go, go, go. And then over time, also I didn't know, I didn't have a plan. I wanted to make it sustainable. So I had to really work. But one thing that I do is I listen to my body, really. I mean, if I find myself stressed and anxious, and I have a pretty severe anxiety disorder, general anxiety disorder. So I really know when I'm overworked, and that's the beauty of working for myself too. I will just give myself that day off, and understand that I can get something done the next day, or unless it's a serious time crunch, obviously I'll get it done. But most stuff you can get it done the next day. I used to feel bad about taking days off, when I worked for people. I'd never, over the last few years when I learned about self-care, I stopped that. I stopped feeling bad about taking time for myself. And when you grow older, you get older, you lose a few people in your life, and you realize how precious life is and how quick it goes. I'm one of those people that constantly appreciates the moments with my sons. My kids are getting grown now. They got facial hair and stuff like that, and they're going to be men soon, and they're going to be, they're not going to come. They might get to a point where they don't call me but once a month or something, so I got to get this time in with them now. So yeah, those are the things I think about that are so much more important to me than working and getting stuff done. And it's also a big motivator for why I want to create passive income in my life too, so I can really focus. I have money work for me and really focus on my family and my friends and just enjoying myself in this life. I wish that we were in a society and a system that provided us the resources we needed to just do that. Unfortunately, you do have to bust your ass to lay a foundation and get to that point. Yeah.
Which, not to keep circling back to, but again, goes straight back to the notion of generational wealth. And if you are someone that inherits a house and inherits a amount of money, there is a passive income that becomes inherent with that right off the bat. So, I'm not a sports guy, so when I throw sports analogies out there, it's just because they're cliche enough for me to understand them. But there's a truth to being born on second or born on third.
Yeah.
There are people, there are people that legitimately are starting out at a place, and I am sympathetic to the fact that if you're born on third, you don't know that. You still have your own challenges. You still have the things that you have to overcome. And because you started where you did, it doesn't make sense to you when people tell you that until you have some perspective.
Yeah. And
perspective, I think the more money you have, the harder perspective can be.
Yes, definitely money can detach you from reality, from the majority, and it is definitely a privilege to be able to take care of yourself. There's a direct correlation between wealth and health for a reason. I'm able to be like, yeah, I'll take the day off and hang out with my kids because I have that ability now. I didn't always have that ability. I didn't work for people that valued time off and mental health days and things like that. That's a societal thing. People gotta survive, because if they take that day off and then they lose their apartment and they you lose their job, lose this, then that's not self-care. Watching your bank account dwindle with no income coming in is not self-care.
No,
it is PTSD. When I say PTSD, I don't mean post, I mean present. And that's what a lot of people are dealing with, present traumatic stress disorders. They never leave their traumatic experience, and that's happening. And so
And finance is and can be the most traumatic stress that a human being has to deal with.
how many marriages has it ruined?
Well, it's a good friend of mine, actually, someone that serves on the board that both Dan and I serve on. A good friend of mine's a financial advisor, really wonderfully smart guy, has really, really just upfront, honest conversations about money, and I've been fortunate enough to sort of help put him into a number of speaking opportunities. So I've got to go see him give his presentations. And one of the ways he tends to start almost all of his presentations, whether he's doing it for millionaires or he's doing it for musicians, is, do you want to guess the number one things that families making $20,000 a year worry about? It's money. Do you want to guess the number one thing that families making $2 million a year worry about? It's money. It doesn't matter where you fall. It just matters how how your perspective fits into that. And because it is the common subject, I think people lose track of the fact that it's not a common reality.
It's not.
The fear that you have and the realities of that fear that you have when you are a renter making $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a year is substantially different than the reality of the fear that you have when you are making millions of dollars a year.
And you're worried about investments and losing maybe your money that way. And I guess that when you got money, at least when you got $2 million, you have options. Opposed to like a $20,000, your options are a lot smaller. You're not going to diversify your portfolio with $20,000, right? $2 million, you can put it in some stuff, and you can build passive income, and you can actually dictate what your lifestyle is going to be like. If you have $20 million or $2 million, and you decide to live a more minimal lifestyle, you can live your life on $2 million.
I'm one of those people, and I hope neither of you fall into this category because, man, is it crippling. But I fall down the YouTube rat hole all the time.
I have to. It's my job. I'm watching YouTube videos all the time.
So I'll start on a subject and I'll rat hole down it. And one of the things that I've recently found to be fascinating is this sort of group of 20 some odd, usually white kids, white guys, talking about adopting a minimalist lifestyle and how they're able to make obscene amounts of money by doing this. And I'm looking at their minimalist lifestyle and I'm like, you still have an apartment that most people can't afford, and you might not have a huge amount in it, but that's a really nice leather couch that you have in your minimalist apartment. Like,
it's like watching Friends, right? Like you're watching for them. Well, like, how did they? That's a big apartment, but and the comparison is important because it is really meaningfully different whether you have not enough money or enough or more than enough money. Like those are different things. They are different things. And at the same time, I think there's a truth maybe about your outlook or something, but the Toni Morrison quote, if you, assuming you make it out of that traumatic situation, and you're not in that right now, but if you're out of that, your job is to turn around and help somebody else. And that applies whether you're on third base worrying about how to get one more base, or you're on, second base or maybe first base. That applies to everybody. And maybe that's helpful to hear if you're the person thinking, well, I only have $1 million. Look, turn around and do it because here's Randal, right? Like, yes, he's able to receive, this great house opportunity. And he really appreciates that. That's something that is going to help him out a lot. But what is he doing with his time? He's turning right around and he's helping people. And, like almost wherever you are, with the exception again of if you are really mired in the trauma of an intractable situation, that's people that really need more help than they're getting immediately to get out of that. And then getting out of that crisis, getting out of that trauma, all of a sudden you're able to take care of yourself and maybe even turn around and help somebody else.
Yeah, I don't think. I think that our society, we really lost touch with our like kind of our more spiritual side, or just like being more in touch with like universe. I'm going to go a little deeper into some stuff, but
Go ahead.
people need to understand like the power of giving back and what that creates. Not only like if I get in some shit right now in my life, like let's say like just things start crumbling, there's going to be a lot of people I can count on because people know that I was somebody they can count on when they needed help. That just there alone, not to mention I'm a firm believer in being able to manifest things and like I think when you with a pure heart give back, and for me it's just about building community and that village mindset. Good things do come to you. I mean, I do believe in like the laws of attraction. I do believe in keeping a positive attitude while also being realistic. I don't think you should always be positive. You gotta be negative sometimes too.
Sure.
It's a survival thing.
Sure.
But like, yeah, I really do. I think that greedy, detached from reality, just like detached from your spiritual side, the universe, all that plays a big. That's something that's plaguing us as people, I think. And I've really felt this. I've really felt this, man. Like I've seen my life completely change, and I've been doing this a long time. And this isn't the first time something big like this has happened for me because of philanthropy work, because of giving back, even if I don't have a whole lot. I was only making $50,000 a year when I started taking ownership, so it wasn't like I was balling and had all this disposable income. So yeah, I hear you, man.
I often joke about this on the podcast because I try to think of myself as at least the most painfully aware of his privileged guy that I can be. I'm born to a relatively well-to-do family, literally grew up on a sailboat. So I say that because my mantra for the majority of my life has been tied to that, which is a rising tide lifts all boats. If you make life better for everyone around you, your life will get better. That is simply the rules of the game. And you can absolutely do everything you can to make everyone, to benefit off everyone else and make your life better. And maybe you'll do that, but that's a lonely world, man. It's a lonely, lonely world.
And like, even if it doesn't, there was a cartoon, there was a guy at like a climate change, convention, and he turns to his buddy and he says, what if this is all a hoax? I mean, what if we're just making the world a better place for nothing? And it's like, I don't know, like maybe all that positivity, the universe will give back, you manifest things. Maybe not, but like, why not do it anyway?
Well, right? It feels good. And one thing I know that's real is that I think I exist in something, and I know that I have feelings. So, and I know other, and whoever y'all are, maybe you're holograms, I don't know, but you have expressions that I see that create feelings for me. So when I help people, it makes me feel good. It makes those holograms feel good. So that seems, I don't know, I'm just being facetious, but like,
you're right.
Yeah, you know what I mean? So I know that it's something that fills my soul. It's something that gives me purpose and gives me a reason to keep going. Like otherwise, I don't know. Gives me hope. It's fun. It's cool. It's a lot of things.
It is, and I think there's a really powerful moment that I know I've had. I believe Dan and I have talked about it. There's that moment, like, of course, there are those moments with your family that are meaningful and wonderful and deep. And of course, there are those moments with your friends that are meaningful and wonderful and deep. But if you're really lucky, there's a third category, which is those really wonderful, meaningful moments with a community of people. Now, whether they're your community or they are some other community that you get to share in that moment, either way, there is something meaningful, powerful, and deep that comes from that experience. And I honestly believe that out of the three, they're all immensely important. But that third one can frankly be as life-changing as anything is, because it immediately confirms that your view is not the only view, but there are people that are going to care regardless.
Yeah.
And that's just, it's a thing of beauty.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, diatribe.
Well said. Well
No, I
said.
love that. Yeah, I agree. That was
Yeah.
very well said.
And you know, you found this, and that's really, that can't be overstated. You know, I mean, I think family, you know, are people that don't choose each other necessarily, and even friends can kind of just fall together out of, I don't know, you know, you meet each other at college or, you know, convenience, but
Yep.
a community, there's often something that's bringing them together. And it's great that you've found this thing that you do, that you seem to be good at, that you're drawn to, that fulfills you. Because I think there's a lot of good things that we could all go out and do tomorrow, but they wouldn't necessarily, you know, fill our souls. They wouldn't necessarily be the thing that, like, I don't know, I know I'm supposed to do this, but I don't necessarily really enjoy it or want to do it. And it's just great that this is something that you found that is that. And I know that you have multiple things, because we haven't even talked for a second about music. Like, you're a phenomenal musician too. I just want to sneak that in before we go.
Thank
That's
you.
all right. That'll be the excuse to have you back for a second one of these conversations.
True.
Yeah, well, if you bring me back, you know, after April, I'll hopefully have my album out by then.
Fantastic.
So
Nice.
yeah,
Fantastic.
But
We
you
will,
wanna talk about
Randall.
that?
We will talk again.
yeah. So I've been working on a project for a couple of years now, and I think it's just about ready to get it out. Especially because 2020 was just such a non-musical year. I did honestly, not even sure if I know how to rap anymore. But like, I really only played a few shows, which typically I'm always playing gigs, and so I just felt like I got to do something on the musical side this year, and so I'm putting out a 16-track album on my son's 16th birthday, April 6th. Yeah, and it will also be the 16th year I've been playing shows. So I think it will be a pretty meaningful,
pretty
meaningful time to release a project.
And doing the math, so what you just said was you started doing shows, not stopped. You started doing shows when your son was born.
Well, my twin sons, I have twins.
Man, that was okay. So you just were not busy enough, but that's so interesting.
Yeah.
I feel like I've heard people say that. I mean, you know, Wrench from Gangsta Grass, you know, he talks about, like, I think his kid was maybe 6 months old when the Justified theme, the big opportunity that really put him out on the road with this band, happened. And you know, I mean, I'm thinking about that. I have a son who's a couple months old now.
Yeah, congrats.
Thank you. And I think about it as, you know, I think maybe you worry about parenting, like, oh, this is it. This is the end. This is the end of I'm done. You know, all the stuff I used to do, I'm not doing it anymore. And then, but you hear about, you know, you started doing music or you performing shows at that point, and it makes more and more sense to me the more I think about it, that, like, it's a time of beginnings. You have new kids to worry about. You've talked about becoming a parent really enriched you, I think, and made you think about a lot of these things in a very different and new way. And also, I mean, you were 19, so you were becoming an adult too.
Yeah, I grew up with my sons for sure.
Sure, absolutely. But you know, it's a big opportunity to just be starting things. So that must have been really, really a powerful thing to grow with your
and
kid.
my mindset behind it, you know, like, I was also very naive, and I thought I was going to blow up off music within a matter of years and have millions of dollars to provide for my sons, you know.
Oh, cool.
That's the way it goes all the time, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, that was kind of my mindset, but also another mindset was like, I've watched my parents work jobs to support us, and they both just, you know, my mom hated her job and endured it for us. My dad, well, obviously he was going through the motions, and I just didn't want to do that. I don't know. I've always been a person that was very unconventional thinker, and I just knew that I wouldn't be able to endure a life of just basic routine coming home. Even though, like, deep down in my soul, I do want to just be comfortable in routine, but. I mean, that's kind of think that's naturally how I am. And I shouldn't say deep down in my soul. Actually, it's the opposite in my soul. But naturally how I am, I want comfort in that. But somewhere in me, I just, like, deep down, I just knew I needed to, like, push that comfort zone, and you know, I just needed to do something out of the ordinary and expressive and creative in order to make it in this life.
Yeah, there's a real difference between the availability of routine and the forced implementation of routine. Like being able to fall back on a routine, I think, is important for anyone, no matter how creative, no matter how erratic you are. Having the ability to say, all right, I'm going to go back into something, even if you're not planning on doing it all the time, versus being in that constant state where you're constantly having to jump off the mountain and build the wings on the way down. Like there's some part of that is intrinsic to a creative person. Like you have to do that to some extent. But if you're forced to do that for everything, that can be an amazingly defeatist situation where, you know, you don't always build the wings and you can only take so many headers.
Right.
You got to have stability, and 2020 for me, I think personally, has been an opportunity to kind of, you know, recenter, restabilize, and I mean, stability is a funny thing. You can find it sort of anywhere. Like I say, you know, having a road life has disrupted my stability of having a home life, but the truth is, like, you can get into a stable routine on the road. If you're on the road for 2 or 3 weeks, it's sort of rinse and repeat every day. And, you know, even mentioning Maslow's hierarchy of needs earlier, you know, that's something like my therapist always takes issue with that, because he's like, you know, it's not really a pyramid. I mean, you can invert it, like, only because those artistic pursuits don't always come once you've built the base of the pyramid. I mean, sometimes you gotta create music and you don't have any pyramid. You're the head, a floating head of the pyramid with nothing, and everything's very unstable. And yet in the midst of all of that, maybe some of the best art.
I was going to say, I think that's when some of the best music is made, or best art is made. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And that's, you know, life as a creative person. I think that you really spoke to that balance really well. It's like deep in your soul, well, but there's also your nature, and there's also your habits, and there is a lot of that balance constantly between, I want some stability, but I really don't want to feel locked down into that, and I need to find something that is satisfying.
Yeah, it balances everything, you know, and that's what self-care really is. Like, I even needed self-care from music, you know, like 2019 was a crazy year. I played like 60 shows on top of a full-time job, part-time student in a university, and raising my sons. I had very little time to myself, and I mean, I was missing my sons too. I mean, the people that suffered the most were my kids. You know, they got the least amount of quality time. So I told myself before the pandemic in 2020, like, I'm taking this year, I'm gonna be a lot more selective about my shows, and I'm gonna have free weekends. And you know, the universe had other plans and said, here's a pandemic to keep your ass home. And yeah, I've gotten tons of quality time with my sons. It's actually been a bit of a blessing I mean, 2020 was the best year of my life. So that says a lot.
I'm glad to hear that. Like I'm really glad to hear that, only because I worry at times that there's so much black and whiting of experience and of the world that, you know, people want to write off 2020 as a bad year overall. I've you know, there have been so many silver linings to this year for me, and I'm not stating that to diminish from any of the awful things that happened, because there was just beyond a truly beyond level of awful that was occurring, but to be able to walk away from things and have that silver lining, be able to say, yeah, here's what I got out of it. You know, there's a good friend of mine, musician, Dan knows him, but I won't call him out, but this is a guy that spent the last 30 years on the road, at least 200 days a year, playing 150 plus shows a year for 30 years. And I talked to him about 4 months into this, and we were just catching up, and he was sort of beside himself at the opportunity because he'd discovered Patreon. And all of a sudden he's like, Ethan, I have a salary. I've never had a salary in my life. I have a salary.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm going to go back and do 150 shows a year. Maybe I'll do 100. Maybe I'll only hit the same regions twice a year instead of 4 times a year. And maybe I'll be more selective and be able to stay home and spend time with my kids. And, you know, it was one of those things, and this isn't to take away from the hard stuff that's going on for anyone. but I really do love hearing the people see the opportunities and be able to embrace those.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's real. My son was born. I
Yeah.
cannot ever throw out 2020.
And you were there for it.
And I was there, and I've been there for a lot of things. Although, the flip side is because of the pandemic, I wasn't able to go to almost any of the pregnancy appointments. So that's a little bit of irony, because if there was no pandemic, I would have probably been on the road, so I wouldn't have been able to go. But I was home, but I couldn't go anyway. But I mean, if that's the worst thing I have to complain about, I've had a pretty lucky year in a lot of ways, and I'm really happy to hear you say that and talk about it. And Ethan too. People finding a salary, like that's so validating for a musician to have a salary, and it sort of speaks to you, in a deep way. You talk to people with regular jobs, and you realize, like, maybe you get too caught up in a salary and your self-worth, like I'm worth this much money.
Yeah.
But having that opportunity, it's important, and I think that kind of comes back again to that stability of you were talking about passive income too, which does sort of tie back into generational wealth. I was just picking up a book recommended to me. It's called The Black Tax, and it's just sort of general history of not just home ownership, but just in general, like, it's expensive to be Black in this country, and it historically has been. And what's the real cost? I mean, if you sit down and calculate, how much does it cost, and what does that mean? And then, what can we do about that?
Yeah.
I mean, musicians are another group that have sort of unique challenges, I guess, stability challenges, maybe.
Absolutely.
And then, you're both.
Yeah, man. I mean, but again, I do have my privileges too, and
right.
I recognize those as well, and I try to utilize those and use them for good and to give back to those who don't have them, or So yeah, but yeah, it's just tough out here, man. It's all kinds of variables and deterrents and things. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Randal, I'm not cutting us off by any stretch, but we're at about an hour and 40, so I did want to say, just right off the bat, I appreciate you taking the time. I've loved this conversation. I truly have loved this conversation, and being able to share it with you and hear more about all of the wonderful things going on in your life. Like, I'm super happy for you, and we will talk again. And I do really want to hear about the album coming out, and I have done my best. I try to, when my music partner Jake, who started the podcast with me, and I are running this, he's usually the one maintaining eye contact while I'm the one throwing up banners and taking notes and doing that kind of thing. I've done my best throughout this. I'm like, maintain eye contact, maintain. But you said the album, I'm like, no, I'm writing that down. So I'm excited about it. But yeah, I really want to thank you for being here, and special thanks to Dan for coming in, and he did not miss a beat.
No.
When I said specifically, I was like, would you mind co-hosting? By the way, it's Randal. Like, I heard like maybe a fraction of a moment of like, well, then it was like, and it's Randal. It was like, okay, like
that was the moment of me figuring out, can I get my wife to take care of our kid? Yeah. And but yeah.
Yeah, it's late over there. Yeah, I mean, it's getting late.
Yeah, it's not so bad. He's down now. But no, man, I always appreciate the chance to get to talk to you. It's always great to hear how you're doing, and you did do music in 2020. I want to just, I know it's a self plug too, but the track on the Gangsta Grass album, "Do Better," just a really, really wonderful verse, and one of the verses, probably the last verse that was written and recorded, and so it was actually in 2020, and it really speaks to the pandemic and the times that we're in, and I really, really appreciated it. The song is called "Do Better," and the hook is about we all do better if we all do better. And then Randal throws in a line about don't hoard the resources if you're one of the fortunate. That was so good that we had to just bring it back again. And it's a really wonderful track. People should really check it out.
You are right. Thanks for reminding me, Danjo, because I had some major musical moments in 2020 that I can't overlook. So, but it was just a different kind of musical year,
That's the truth. That is the truth.
And we should.
But yeah,
we
thank
should.
you all. Thank you for having me. This has been a pleasure chatting with y'all. Such a great conversation. That hour and 50 minutes went by really fast.
Yeah, you know,
Really fast.
The funny thing is, when we started doing this, I think we initially intended we were aiming like an hour 15, and they all started going 2 hours. So like after we got through the first slew of guests that we had that first season, and I was talking to the second slew, I was like, yeah, we generally run about 2 hours. And what I always found funny is the people that immediately were like, 2 hours, I don't know, that's a little much. Those are the people that like 2 hours and 45 minutes. I'm like, I hate to cut us off.
Right. You know, seriously, and when you said an hour and a half, I was like, yeah, I could do that. I mean, I have the time, but I highly doubt we'll get there. But yeah, not a problem. And Danjo, you definitely gave Jake a run for his money. You might have a position.
Well, I appreciate it, man. I mean, look, just any time you're on, I will fight him if I have to. I will.
Well,
Yeah, we'll just start doing team interviews. It's like Step Brothers, right?
No doubt.
For sure. Yeah, and Ethan, thanks so much for having me on, man. I appreciate it.
Our pleasure. You know, I was telling Dan before we started that our intent always was to come up with a format that we felt was a good format, and in particular, I feel like you can go to YouTube and you can find 5-minute like interview clips and 10-minute interview clips, but really long form conversations are kind of a thing that you don't find as much. And that's specifically what we're looking for. We're looking for, like, we want to talk. We don't want to just say, oh, and gentrification and generational wealth, and that's all a thing. And yeah, and we're doing our best to, okay, end of interview. Because I think those words get just distilled down into being simplified to mean something other than what they really do. And the complexity of what they actually mean and what the effects of them are need to be discussed. You need to be able to be honest in a real way, instead of, I'm not trying to pick on network news, but instead of having the conservative guy basically saying, welfare is a trap, and the Democrats saying, give everyone money, and that's the end of the conversation. Like, that's not a conversation.
Neither of those are personal, I mean, whether you're for or against something, I think if you're just talking about it in the abstract or the big picture, that's not enough. You want to actually talk to somebody and with somebody who's actually doing something specific. And that's where you really start to see, okay, well, how does that actually affect you? What does it actually mean to you in your life?
Yeah, not enough gray area in life, and we all understand that when we talk about media, the black and white narrative is an agenda. It is a divisive agenda. I mean, divide and conquer is a real thing, and I honestly don't think I've seen our country more divided than it has been, at least under the Trump administration, but because of our media. And you're absolutely right.
Longer conversation, but
yes, that's another hour and 55.
Yeah.
Certainly not going to end in 3 days.
No, definitely not.
The birth of the 24-hour news cycle, I feel, has just led to a not intentional but inevitable divide, because the only way to keep attention through that process is through fear, because you can't keep people going on 24 hours of hope. I love hope. Hope does great things for me. After an hour and a half, I'll be like, all right, so I gotta take the dog for a walk.
It's like, the world's perfect. I can go now.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that we're at the point now in this interview where it's time to instill fear on the network. So be afraid. Be very afraid.
Don't give money to Taking Ownership PDX. Your house might collapse, and nobody will be there to help you.
Yeah, I think you're onto something, man. You really got it.
And that is takingownershippdx.com, tossed up on the screen right now. And I do highly recommend you take a look at that. Yeah. When we sign off, I will again run that wonderful little manifesto you guys put together. I think it's a wonderful video. It really speaks to the heart of what you guys are doing. So, Randal Wyatt, thank you so much for being here. Dan Whitener, Danjo, thank you so much for being the guest host this week. And Randal, we'll let you go for the time being, and Dan and I'll sign off. And thanks.
All right, y'all have a good night, and I look forward to the next session. All right, y'all. See ya.
Have a
Thanks
good
so
one.
much, man.
Man, that was
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, knew it would be good. Definitely knew it would be good. But I mean, I don't know everything about the guy, so there's definitely some stuff there that was new to me, and it just what a great fellow.
I love the gift for me of doing this podcast has really been that is getting to know people, because I mean you and I run into this all the time, and actually you and I are a good example of this. I've considered you a friend for a long time. Most of our interactions are either in business meetings or at festivals and conferences
Oh,
where
sure.
it's so great to see you and I give you a big ass hug,
Yeah.
and I we maybe we have a meal together and catch up, and I don't see you again because
Yeah.
it's at a conference.
We should hang out. Ships in the night, and
Yep.
it's great. And I mean, there's so many people that I have exactly that relationship with, and I think it partially for performing musicians. When you're sort of the only one in the room,
Mm-hmm.
it can be a surprisingly isolating thing,
Yep.
and you're very unlikely to spend a lot of time around your peers. Somebody who
Yeah.
does the same thing as you. Like, why would there be another musician here? I'm the musician. So, and then a festival or a conference, those are those rare opportunities where you do get to cross paths, which is what makes them so wonderful.
Yeah.
But outside of that, this is a really, really unusual thing.
So that's really been the gift of this to me is being able to have long form conversation like that. Honestly, you guys were our second episode, and I love the first episode was with Adam Ezra, who I think the world of as well. But
Yeah.
being able to sit down, have a very real conversation, from both your and Randy's perspectives, which are undoubtedly speaking to a different life experience than
Mm-hmm.
kid who grew up on a sailboat.
And different from each other too.
Yeah, and that was so wonderful to have that between the four of us then, and so many folks that we've been able to have it now. So thank you not only for continuing to be part of that conversation, but for recommending spectacular people like Randall, because like that's I think
I'll
that's
keep
our,
them. I'll keep them coming, man. You
please
you
do.
mentioned Tulsa, and yeah, I have to probably talk to you after this, but it's again. I mean, I think of it as an opportunity that I've had through touring. It's a very simple thing, but just traveling, and also getting to play shows that a show congregates so many people, and then to do that in so many different places. It's, I mean, it can be isolating in one way, but on the other hand, you get it's kind of this all the time. You get so many wonderful conversations, and I just, that's right now. That's sort of the thing that I owe to give back. It's just like I know some pretty interesting people.
So let's talk, because not only will I take those interesting people, but honestly, I think as we start talking, we're ramping down the second season. Right now, we've got 3 more episodes in front of us, and then we're going to take a little break as we sort of formulate the third season. I think one of the big differences, the first season, we were able to really build a following because it was happening during festival season when people were used
Right.
to doing a lot of music stuff. So we were able to sort of garner attention from that. This season's kind of been through the holidays, and we've had very erratic evenings where we've had like 85 people watching, and then we've had 5 people watching and 8 people, and like I want to make sure as we get to the third to try to get the right cadence so people can have a feel for what they're getting into and going to be getting out of the conversation, because the funny part is what the big difference is. First rounds this season, our numbers have been down, but our watches after the fact have been way up. So the value, people are finding the value. They're just not finding it in the live space.
I think that makes sense. I mean, I only just had a kid, so there's this extra element to me of like, I really can't do this right now, but I will catch up to it later. I'm so sorry,
Oh
but
no,
then
yeah.
even before I had a kid, like I think it's a really, it's a tough time. I mean, God, Randall talking about anxiety. I think a lot of people are struggling
It's
with
real.
just the ability to even sit down to pay attention to something is so compromised. So obviously, to be able to do it on your own time, I empathize with that. But yeah, at the same time, it's good to get people watching it in the moment. I think we all with that, Gangsta Grass doing our own Twitch stream, we always are trying to figure out, what do people want to be engaging on? What's the conversation?
Absolutely. Well, we'll keep searching for the answer to that question, because I don't think there's a single answer to that question. I think there are lots of answers, and that's sort of the joy of this experience, is opening yourselves up to that being the answer. So, that being said, we should sign off. I do want to thank Dan on banjo, for being here.
Ethan on fancy. Nope. Either way. I'm new at this.
Oh, it's all good, Jake. Every week you watch him, and he still's got a 50-50 shot. I literally have a notch on the side of my lens to remind. I've gotten that bad about it, but so much fun having you, buddy, and we'll have you back in again soon.
Really
Thanks for people that tuned in, and we'll see you next week with Michael Weeks from the Mass Council of Human Service Providers. Basically talking to a guy who has spent the last 25-30 years of his career as an advocate for social service and educational programs throughout Massachusetts, and actually bringing sort of to actually this is going to be the great lead-in from the conversation with Randall. He's brought the services so that when you start talking about grants and you start talking about government interaction, those are the services that his organization brings to organizations like Taking Ownership. So that'll be a fun conversation. But
yeah,
thanks everybody. Have a great week. We'll see you soon.
Take it easy.